through. And you can imagine this process was repeated quite a bit. Interestingly enough, the parable of the sower appears to be sort of a linchpin. And I want to ask you to turn to Mark 4:13. Mark 4:13. The parable of the sower appears to be a very key parable. Okay, Mark 4:13. And this is, of course, the parable of the sower seems to be a key parable. And he said unto them, Know ye not this parable? How then will you know all parables? So it appears, and I looked at all kinds of commentaries and, check 10 and get 15 different answers. But the basic understanding here seems to be that once you learn the context, the format, and the way I use parables, if you use that and apply that to other parables, it will help you make more sense. So the parable of the sower, as mentioned in Mark 4, says it's a very important one. It's the first one that's recorded in the book of Matthew. So it's kind of a linchpin. So it's one that you want to know and understand, and will help you understand the other parables, if that makes sense. Why did Jesus teach in parables? By resorting to parables, as already been said, Jesus effectively separated the truth seekers from the curiosity seekers. There would have been a whole lot of hangers-on that are just like, hey, there's not a lot going on. I think I'll go out and listen to this man. I've heard interesting stuff about him. I see that he's around and he's teaching and people are interested and there seems to be crowds around him. So we're just going to go look. We're really not interested, but we're going to go look. Okay? So he's as Dennis just said, it's like you're going to have to be a little bit serious about it. Or Julian also mentioned the Ethiopian eunuch. The Ethiopian eunuch had been studying Isaiah in the chariot as he's returning home. And he's reading it, but he didn't understand it. And when he's asked, do you understand it? He's told, or he responds, how can I without someone to help me understand it? So that's the desire that he had. And once he took it in, he obviously acted upon it. And that's what Jesus is expecting from these people, that they're going to be serious about his teachings and his understanding.
Bob,
yes, please.
The Pharisees are a prime example. They saw these miracles, they heard his teachings. If anyone should have understood it, it should have been them. But all they wanted to do was to kill him.
Yep.
And that's all their focus was. So that.
Yeah, they saw him as a problem and they had to eliminate it. Interestingly enough, you're absolutely right, though. The Pharisees and the Sadducees and all those would have been more learned, as Ryan mentioned. These were a lot of the audience would have been farmers and laborers and so on and so forth. But those folks were learned. They had read a lot. They understood the Old Testament and the teachings that came from the Old Testament, and should have been prepared to take it in. You're absolutely right. Jesus utilized parables to engage in theological debates with Jewish religious teachers. Turn to Matthew 21, if you would. Matthew 21:23. And we see Jesus coming to the temple. When he came to the temple, the chief priests and elders of the people came unto him as he was teaching and said, By what authority doest thou these things? And who gave thee this authority? And Jesus answered and said unto them, I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I, and likewise will tell you what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, whence was it, from heaven or of men? And they reasoned with themselves, saying, If he shall say from heaven, he'll say to us, Why did you not believe him? But if he shall say of men, we fear the people, for all hold John as a prophet. They answered Jesus and said, We cannot tell. And he said unto them, Neither tell I by what authority I do these things. But what think ye? A certain man had two sons, and he came to the first and said, Go work in the day in the vineyard. Okay, so Jesus then responds with a parable. Isn't that interesting? They've challenged him. He responds, Well, I'll answer your question, you answer mine. And they're afraid to answer because they're in a rock and a hard place. If they say God, then it means they don't believe. If they say the people, they fear the people are going to overthrow them because everybody loved John. So they're in a rock and a hard place. So they say, we can't tell. So Jesus says, well, I'm not going to answer you either, which is interesting exchange. But then he uses a transitional parable to move away from it and make a point. It's interesting. Okay, so he used it to kind of refute some of those that were challenging his authority. It's an interesting technique. Jesus would then explain his teaching to the disciple. In addition to concealing the message, the disinterested and the detractors, the parables were a very effective way to teach those who were willing to work for the answers. It was a way for Jesus to compare the known earthly truths to the heavenly truths. Okay, and that's what we'll see in parables. We have known earthly truths like seed, how seed works, and why seed is successful and why it's not. They would have known those things, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the parables, they're very, very commonplace types of things that Jesus uses, but he uses them to elevate a heavenly thought from them. Okay? How about the subject matter of the parables of Jesus? The general theme is the kingdom of heaven. We looked at that in Matthew 13:11. The general theme of all the parables is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is trying to educate them on what heaven's going to mean, how heaven is going to be so important, what heaven will mean to them, the real value of the kingdom of heaven and what they're working towards. This is the goal that they have in the end. So the common theme, the subject theme typically of all the parables is the kingdom of heaven. There seem to be some sub-themes that Jesus uses, and it's kind of an interesting process. The character of the kingdom, because if you look at all the parables, and we'd have to analyze them, and time doesn't permit me to do that, but the kingdom of heaven is again the overriding theme. But then, how is heaven? What's it going to be like? How will heaven be like? What will it mean to me? What will I see when I go there? Some of the parables that would have this kind of thought in it is the mustard seed, the leaven, the hidden treasure, and the pearl of great price. If you think of the pearl of great price, we're looking at something that's worth everything this individual had. He sold everything, bought this pearl. That's how we're to be. We're to give up everything for heaven in the end. Everything else is trivial compared to the value of heaven in the end. And those are kind of some of the things that he talks about. But he talks about the character of the kingdom. Also talks about the character of the king. What will God and Jesus be like? What will God do for us? Some of those would be like workers in the vineyard and the lost son. We talk about the workers in the vineyard, and some of the comparisons you see is some workers come early, some come late, some come in the afternoon, but they all paid the same wage. So you know, the lesson we can gather from that is it's never too late to convert and you know, respond to the gospel and do the right things, so that we are prepared for the heaven in the end. So another is the character of the king's subjects. Talks about us, the king's subjects. Good Samaritan, persistent widow. Those are all very, very positive things. We think of the Good Samaritan probably is the one that comes. If I say parable, that's probably the one that comes to the top of your head. It's such a powerful, powerful message that we know that the Samaritans and the Jews had nothing to do with each other. Yet this man digs in his pocket, takes him to a place and gets him comfort and says, if you need more money when I come back through, I'll take care of it. So it's just showing how kind and generous and giving and loving that man was. So it's talking about how we are to be as
just thinking the Good Samaritan, the Jewish leaders would thought of him as a dog, and yet look at his example.
Well, we look at it, the priest crossed the road to get away from him, you know. And these were the people that would have been criticizing Jesus. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So those are the kind of things we see, you know, we can break down. And again, they're more complex than that, but this is an example of what we're looking for as we study the parables, as we read the parables. We can kind of look and see, well, does it tell me about the character of the kingdom? Does it tell me about the character of the king? Does it tell me about us as the king's subjects, as members of the Lord's church? How are we as we go about our business? Are we like the Good Samaritan? Are we that kind of person? Okay, interpretations of the parables of Jesus. Now, if you want to a treat. You can go and you can look on the internet about all kinds of interpretations of the parables, and you'll find just crazy, nonsensical stuff. But the parables of Jesus, if you really take them and open your heart and your minds to it, they're not as difficult as one might think. As I said, it's like, how many times do you want to study the book of Revelation? If you open your heart, you got the right material and you got the right instructor, you can get there. Same way with the parables of Jesus. There are two extremes to avoid when we interpret parables, and that's what I'm talking about, because people go to extremes. Seeking to find some spiritual truth in every little detail. Have you ever tried to do that? Have you ever tried to take a parable? Because I tried to do it. I took a parable just for my own peace of mind and tried to analyze it and try to look for something, little nuances and everything. And you know what? All you do is get boggled down. There are truths in the parable, and there are just words in the parable that support those truths. And we want to look at parables and think, boy, I got to dig down on this whole entire parable and come up with it. And we're going to get bogged down. That's not necessarily the way it is. It's like you have to look at it with an open mind and open heart, but you'll see the truths as you sincerely pursue them. And secondly, believing that there is only one spiritual truth in every little detail. There are multiple details in there. There may be 3 truths in a parable. There may be 5 truths in a parable. There may be only 1 truth in a parable. So it's just again, not going to the extremes, but using common sense as you approach the parable study. And I think it makes more sense. Some guidelines for proper interpretation. Jesus gives us, when he talks in parable, he gives us a clue. As I said here, learn from the explanations Jesus gave in those parables when he explained them further. Jesus will give us insight into the parables. He won't necessarily break them down like an instructor would and diagram every word in that parable, but he will break them down and give you a clue on what he's trying to convey to you. So even if you're not learned, as Ryan alluded to, if you're not learned, you could still take truths and value from the parables as you study them. Okay, so you can. It's kind of like, excuse me. It's kind of like determining something from the context. We always talk about taking a Bible passage out of context. John 3:16. That's all we need, right? Well, no, it's not all we need. There are contexts to everything. So we need to look at the context. So again, it requires us to be Bible students. It really does. And that's not a bad thing at all. That's what we're expected to do. It takes some diligence and some desire to dig down and to study, and as Dennis said, to ask questions. You don't understand. Ask questions. But again, we can learn from what Jesus says. Understanding the parable of the sower, which helps understand regarding other parables. We had that here in Mark 4:13 we already read, and he said unto them, know ye not this parable, and how then will you know all parables? So he was telling them to look at the parable of the sower, which is not a bad thing for us to do. Okay? Look at the parable of the sower and analyze it and look at it, and then maybe it'll help us with the other parables as well. That's what Jesus told them to study. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's good for us as well. And then look for the central truth of the parable. There will be a central truth, and there'll be tertiary or additional truths with the parable. Make sure that any other truths gleaned from the parable are in harmony with it. Okay, so if we take a central truth, and I guess this is an interesting concept, and I did some digging on this. If we take a central truth and we stop, let's look then at the central truth, and let's look at the other truths that are there, or if there are any. We want to make sure that it's consistent throughout the parable, our understanding of the parable. Does that make sense? So if we take a wrong assumption at the start and we just go with it and never dig down and look at the other stuff, we're going to have a wrong assumption moving forward. So all saying here is look for the central truth, read through it, think you understand it, and then look for the additional things that support it. And the parable will be consistent. That's Jesus' teaching was perfect, as we know, and it was there for us to find. interpretations of the parables of Jesus. Some guidelines for proper identification. I already mentioned this. Consider carefully the context of Jesus' word. Remember, parables were originally spoken to conceal truth from those who are unworthy of their understanding. Due to this fact, sometimes it may be difficult to easily understand their meanings. It may require additional study to know what Jesus was conveying to his disciples then and to us today. And parables often have more than one lesson. When we talk about the parable of talents, there's more than one lesson in the parable of the talents if you look at it. Primary lesson, when the Lord returns, he will judge each of us on how we have used our talents. That's one lesson in the parable of talents. Another lesson would be all have been given talents by God. So we need to all look inside ourselves and see what the talents are that God gave us and use them. I think that's one of the things that we often forget, that we say, well, I'd like to be like that person. He can quote the Bible there. I'd like to be like that person, so on and so forth. But we all have talents. That's why synergistically we are stronger as a group of Christians meeting here at the Jamestown Church of Christ. We all have talents. The key is if we use them or not. If we leave them dormant and we don't use them, then God's going to have a problem with us, and that's really what the parable of talents talks about. Any thoughts on any of that stuff? I'm going through this material quick. We might be done early. Following these guidelines to interpret the parables of Jesus, we can look forward to understanding more fully the mysteries. We talked about that in Matthew 13:11. Or revealed truths of the kingdom of heaven, containing things secret from the foundation of the world. These secrets were made known to men through the preaching and teaching of Jesus Christ. Romans 16:25. Now to him that is of power to establish you according to any gospel, and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery, which was kept secret since the world began, but now is made manifest by the scripture of the prophet, according to the commandment of the everlasting God, made known to the nations for the obedience of faith. And that's why Jesus teaches. He was trying to bring this knowledge out to all the nations. What I want to do now is I want to back up. Oops, too far. Okay, I want to look at a few parables and see if we can apply what we've talked about here. And like I said, I have a list of 38, and I'd like, if I could, get a volunteer to read. Let's look at the new cloth and the new wineskin. That just happens to be the top one on this particular list. Turn to Matthew 9:16 and 17. Matthew 9:16 and 17. This parable is also shown in Mark and in Luke as well, but we're going to start with Matthew. Matthew 9:16 and 17. If someone has that, if they want to read that.
No one patches an old garment with unshrunk cloth, because the patch pulls away from the garment and makes the tear worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the skins burst, the wine spills out and the skins are ruined. But they put new wine into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved.
Okay. Let's look at the parallel passage in Mark 2. Mark 2:21. Very similar. It reads the same way. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away the new one from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins. Okay, let's look at here. What do we see in here? What if we look at the central theme of this? Can anybody suggest? Anybody think of what we're talking about here? Go ahead, Dennis.
You know, he's talking about fasting because that's what the question was. They asked
Yes.
Why don't your disciples fast? And kind of if you just want to go big picture,
Yeah.
there's a way to do things. Everybody in that audience knew that if you had an old garment and you put a brand new piece of cloth on it, they're going to shrink differently and they'll tear. You don't do it that way. It
Right.
doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I mean, at the very basic level, it doesn't make any sense for my followers to be fasting now.
Right. And so what he's saying is you're making an assumption about certain things and you're applying it to my disciples, and it doesn't apply to them, right? It doesn't fit with them. Is there anything else in there that we can see? Any other things that strike you as one of the things I get out of it, and I don't know if this is what Jesus wanted to, but maybe it's saying what Dennis said is another way is you have to do things right. You have to do things properly. There's a time and a place for everything, and there's a way to do things that will be effective, and there's a way to do things that will be ineffective. And so we can look at this and we can analyze each and every word, but I'm not sure we're going to get anything out of it separate. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Let's try another simple one that we all are very familiar with. Let's look at the sower. Let's look at Matthew 13:3. Let's look at the sower. Matthew 13:3. Anybody have that? Want to read it? Dennis, you got it?
And he told them many things in parables, saying.
Go ahead and read through. I'm sorry. 3 through 23, please.
He told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Then the disciples came and said to him, why do you speak to them in parables? He answered them, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But for the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they did not see, and hearing they did not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, you will indeed hear but never understand, you will indeed see but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are you, for they see, blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it.
Okay. Go ahead. 18. This really is the parable of the sower explained. Go ahead, please.
Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what is sown along the path. For what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for that which is sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30.
Okay, so we can look at this and we see, as we talked earlier, it's a comparison. So we have the thorny soil, the good soil, so on and so forth. And as we go through this, the explanation is what it means. And like verse 22 says, for what was sown among the thorns, this is one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. So what Jesus is doing here is he's using a very simple comparison of as Ryan indicated, something that they were used to, sowing seed and making sure they put it in the right place. As you can imagine, they wouldn't have had a lot of money to waste a lot of seed, so they would have been very careful about it, and they would have learned. And so this account here, this parable of the sower, Jesus says, use this, understand this, and it'll help you understand the other parables. Does that make sense? And so we see the way it's formulated. They put one against another. They compare them, and then we make a heavenly application. Those that are in the rich soil that do what's well and grows and thrives, and so on, will ultimately end up in heaven. That's the implication or the lesson that you will have. But we go through an analysis of 4 different types of soil so that we see different things that will happen. And this goes back to the, I said we had the kingdom, the king, and the king's subjects. This is the king's subjects. This is how the king's subjects are going to act and what's going to happen with them and how they will develop and how they will be in heaven. So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's kind of the way that I think we should approach parables. Is we read through it, we look at it, we look for the richness, and then we look for additional things to support our conclusion as we come to the end of that. And then I think we'll get a deeper understanding of parables. Does that make sense? Any thoughts or last word here? Go ahead, please, Sean.
One quick thought. I think when we just glance at something and don't really have an interest in it, we can easily say, I think that's to some degree a parable, or a position of a parable. There's people that look at those and say, well, I don't understand that, I don't want to look more into it. But if you're seeking something, right, if you're seeking something, I think you find in the Bible that God reveals those things to us if we're pursuing after them. So I think that's true of parable. We just dismiss them off the cuff and they're hard to understand. If we look at the context and the surrounding passages and understand them, we can know what it's saying.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think we as Christians have an obligation to do that same thing in all our study, of course. But I think the parables and books like Revelation and so on require a deeper attention to it, just as Sean has said. We have to be serious about it. We're to be students of the Bible, and I think that's one of the things I take away from this study here. All right? Thank you.